Hello and welcome to the next chapter. Today we're going to talk about portraiture, the fundamentals of portraiture. What exactly is it and how best to approach portraiture to get the best portraits. So this is portraiture, enjoy. So what is portraiture exactly? Quite often people mistake portraiture to be the standard head, shoulders, arm, eyes and face image. That is a portrait, but portraiture extends far beyond that. Not only is it humans, it can also be animals. It can be really close, it can just be the face, it can be quite wide, include a little bit more environment around your subject. The purpose of portraiture is to introduce you to a character or characters. It's about a character. That is portraiture's essential purpose. Now, one thing I can suggest, especially when you're going to a faraway place to photograph people, we're going to focus on people in this chapter, is prepare and do a little bit of research. Firstly, research the area, research the people you're going to photograph, if it's tribes or faraway and remote cultures. Do a little bit of research on several elements. Those can be as simple as what they look like, how they dress, what members of the tribe dress differently. When are their most important days of the year? When are they having functions and ceremonies where they might dress even more extravagantly? What those tribes are used to and not used to. Some people might travel across the world to visit a certain tribe and take photographs of them, only to realize they're very hostile towards photographers and they don't get any photographs without clay pots being thrown at them. So do a little bit of research, and not only into what the tribes and the people are all about, but also to what's been done already. In today's day, a photographer might take a beautiful image that becomes quite famous and a lot of the world see it, and he uses a particular style. That style then gets abused and many people start using it, and it gets oversaturated and it gets boring. So go onto social media and search the hashtag of the people you're going to, or the tribes or the cultures you're going to, and see what has been done a lot or too much, and try and approach it differently to get something that stands out. Another thing to bear in mind, which is only a guideline, and I've spoken about this before, is to have the mood of your colors and the mood of your subject to conform and not confront. Certain colors emit certain emotions. Bright colors, saturated colors have a feeling of happiness or joy. So a subject that emits the same feelings will conform with those colors better, whereas dark and moody colors will suit a dark and moody subject, something a little bit sadder, something a little bit more gloomy, such as an elder of a remote tribe, with wrinkles over their face, with their eyes down, with a feeling of sadness. Their life is hard. Dark and gloomy colors might suit that scene a little bit better. Now, there's always exceptions, and sometimes a smiling, happy image works in black and white with dark and contrasty edits. There's always room for an exception. Even with a smiling, happy child that we mentioned before, sometimes dark, contrasty colors are going to work better. There is always an exception, but having the emotional impact of your colors conform with the emotional impact of your subject is a good place to start and a really good guideline to go on. Another thing to consider with portraiture is it's not always about the face. We sometimes get drawn into what the face is doing and forget about other elements of our subject. The hands tell a beautiful story. We've talked about hands before and how they can add such a different dynamic to your image and tell a powerful story. So look at what the hands are doing. Sometimes you can even include just the hands in the frame. It slightly drifts out of portraiture, but if the face and the hands are in the same frame, you can tell a very powerful story because the hands themselves are telling a story in their own right. Not only that, is the hands and the arms can act as leading lines and draw the viewer into the face, which is essentially the most important part of your frame. So use the hands. Always consider what the arms and hands are doing. Either they can become part of the story, or they can be the story towards the main part of your story. Either way, you've got to pay attention to what the hands and arms are doing. One of the most important things with portraiture, because you're dealing with a human subject, humans are sensitive. You've got to connect with your subject. Your subject's got to know that you respect them and you value them and acknowledge them. If you come into a scene and you're only after a picture and that's evident to your subject, they're going to resent your presence and you're going to get very rigid, listless images with no life and very little emotion. That resentfulness is going to be translated in your image. That's the feeling your viewer is going to get. It's going to be an uncomfortable image to look at, and your viewer might resent the image itself. So you've got to respect and connect with your subject. Instead of just getting down and taking pictures and firing off, connect with your subject, talk to them, acknowledge them, get them comfortable with your presence, because in that comfort lies the most candid and most powerful images you can capture. So don't just fire away. Take your time, respect your subject, connect with your subject, and you'll find you'll get the best images possible. Another thing with portraiture is your subject doesn't always have to face you. Quite often people are always running to get in front of their subject, especially when you're in a remote culture or tribe. When you're in a studio, things are slightly different. But when you're out in the bush and you're dealing with people that don't take suggestions from cameramen. You've got to position yourself correctly, and you don't always have to be in front. If you're constantly trying to get in front of your subject, they might get uncomfortable with your presence. And sometimes the best image is actually behind your subject, shooting from a different perspective, as if you're looking in the direction of that subject, and the story is lying in front of your subject, which means if you were shooting from their front, you'd miss the whole story or get the back of the story. It wouldn't be that evident. So bear in mind that the best picture might actually be from shooting behind your subject. Now in post-processing is as much an art as taking the picture itself. Don't shy away from it. And the sky's your limit with post-processing, and sometimes in portraiture, it depends on your style. Your images might just need a little bit of contrast or a little bit of saturation, and it is exactly as it should be. It's the best it can be, especially in documentative genres or street photography. But sometimes you can go really drastic on your edits and make exquisite works of fine art where you completely distance your original image from what was natural, and you create something completely different, a different story, an entirely different emotion through drastic edits in Photoshop, Lightroom, whatever it might be. The key is to do it well and do it good. And the key is to have a purpose to your edit, to have ownership. Why am I editing it this way? Not only is it to create emotion, but it's to have ownership over your image. This is my style and I do it well. So if you're going to do drastic edits, make sure you do it well and you do it consistently. Now we're going to go into genres of portraiture. There's so many different ways to approach portraiture, and all of them have different results and are for different purposes. The first one is the most common, which is the documentative genre. Documentative is as it describes. It is documenting a scene as it is. There's no fancy edits needed. There's no studio equipment, fancy props to make it different from what it is. Its entire purpose is to simply document what's happening in its most natural state. If it's people on the street, it is exactly what it is. People in the street. You haven't added anything. You haven't tried to change what's there in any way through post-processing or props or light. You are only telling the story of that event exactly how it is and not trying to change it to your perspective. Then there's traditional portraiture. I find it horribly boring, but there is a purpose for it, and if you want to get into it, that's fine. This is the baseline of portraiture, where it began, where the word was derived from. Your subject has no extravagant expressions. The scene is not full of powerful stories or physical elements in the background that hold visual mass that are leading the viewer through the frame. There's nothing intricate or complicated about it. It is simply introducing you to a character in its most simple form. Usually it's linked to family portraits or portraits of individuals. Passport photos is the best way to describe traditional portraiture. Just traditional portraiture. It has its purpose, but usually it's an industrial purpose. It's not really to create art. Then there's the environmental approach. This is when we go a little bit wider. This is when we want to tell a story not only about a character, but the environment that they're in. We include what's around them. We don't want it to be just a person. We want it to be that person in his life in the street, or his life in the churches, or their life in the village. And in order to tell that story, we have to let in a bit of the church, and let in a bit of the village, and let in a bit of the street. It's a beautiful approach to portraiture. It's a little bit more difficult because remember, we have different elements at work now that we need to compose. It's not just that one character. But when we get it right and we compose those picture planes that we've allowed in, we can create truly beautiful works of art. And now it's my absolute favorite approach to portraiture. And remember, we can apply different approaches, more than one approach to one image. And that is the candid approach. What candid essentially means is that your subject is unaware of your presence. They are going about in their daily business, unaffected by the photographer, as if you weren't there. They're completely oblivious to you. And in those moments, I personally find that the most powerful images exist. Sometimes it's quite hard to do. Your subject notices you, and even if they look away, in the facial expressions and the rigidity of their body, the viewer can get a feeling that they're still aware of the camera, even though they're not looking straight at it. They've all stiffened up and they're trying to pose. Having a candid subject truly gives you the opportunity to create the most beautiful images, because it tells the story of what they're doing and what their life's about without any interference from the outside world. And personally, this is what I strive for in my photography. I hope my subjects get to a point where they're so comfortable with my presence that they don't even notice that I'm there, because all my most powerful portraiture shots have all been candid. And then there's this surreal approach. Now here the boundaries are almost unlimited. We're creating something that's surreal. Unreal is an easier way of describing it. And often we do this in post-processing or through creative techniques in camera. Like this shot of the Omo Valley. Through a slow shutter speed and the use of a few flashes, I've created ghostly figures in the frame underneath a night sky. That's exactly what I wanted to do. It's an unreal shot. That's not something you can see with a natural eye, but that's exactly what I was trying to evoke in this image. I wanted the shapes of people to be ghostly in the scene, to be vague, to be hard to distinguish, to be unreal, to be surreal. And through a few creative techniques, we managed to accomplish that. And in post-processing, you can really do whatever you like. Like this villageman, I've made it black and white, but I've made his eyes. Now this surreal approach, even though this is not what the human eye sees, and it's not real, it's completely unnatural. It does tell a strong story. When those villagemen are in the shebeens, they drink so much of the most horrendous alcohol you've ever had. Trust me, I've had a lot of it. It's not advisable. Their eyes really do go red. And I have completely exaggerated that redness. I've completely exaggerated the whole scene into a completely unnatural realm. But that was my purpose, and sometimes it works. Don't let the confines of reality hold you back on creating something that's artistic and powerful. The approach of macro photography in portraiture is quite often used, and is pretty much the only genre of portraiture that sometimes you might need specific equipment. You can take macro shots with non-macro lenses, but the detail's not really there. You might need a macro lens, an 85mm macro, a 90mm macro, a 100mm macro. And the point of macro is to focus on particular details, tiny elements of your subject. Usually it's just the eye, but it can be many things. It could be the fingertips, it could be anything, so long as it's minute and it still has a purpose, which is why the eye is often used. And there's the abstract approach, which can be sometimes linked to the surreal approach, and often they work hand in hand. Abstract is taking the normal and throwing the normal in the bin and creating something completely different. It might be hard to understand, but it's beautiful to look at. It might be easy to understand, but it's completely unnatural. The sky's your limit here. You might slow your shutter speed at a whole bunch of dancing villages and capture all these lights dancing all over the frame. Some viewers might not see what's going on there, but they're intrigued by it. That's the purpose of abstract, is to be something unreal, something you've got to think about, something that leaves it up to the imagination. It could be taking a picture of what your subject's doing. If your subject's smoking, it could be taking a picture of the smoke instead of your subject and leaving it up to the viewer to decide where that smoke has come from. It could be, again, using flashes and motion blur to create weird shapes and to create a weird story that's hard to understand. That is the purpose of abstract, and it is so powerful in portraiture, but it does take some courage, because quite often it doesn't work out. But it does take some practice, because abstract photography takes a lot of creativity to get right, and sometimes you've got to have some courage, because some people might just not get it and think it's a pile of dog shit, when actually it's a masterpiece and other people will see the beauty that it is. Street photography, in terms of portraiture, refers to exactly what it says. It is taking pictures of people in streets, but it's not constrained to that. It could be people in villages, people around buildings in their natural habitat. And usually its purpose is to describe what street life is like. It's not necessarily just about a character, unless that character is wearing the story of the street. Mud, a dirty face, scars, drug addiction, dirty hats, torn clothes. In that case, it still is technically street photography, but usually you step a little bit back and let a bit of the street in, or let a bit of the village in, let a little bit of their life in, and tell the story of the street. It is a highly rewarding genre of photography and can test you on so many different levels, but when you get it right, it's truly addictive. So that's all the genres of portraiture, and many of them can be applied to one particular image, or one can be applied to one particular image, or there might be some that don't apply to any of the genres that I've mentioned. But these are some good guidelines to why certain images exist in certain genres, and why they're useful in that genre and not useful in other genres, and should help you decide what genre you want to stick to, or what genres you want to stick to. If your subject being candid is important to you, figure out why, and what I've just mentioned might help you with that, and why your subject being candid is so important to make a powerful image. So take all these guidelines lightly in your portraiture journey, and we'll dive more into each subject and into composition and how to approach different genres at a later stage and in a much more dense manner. But for now, that's the fundamentals of portraiture, and I'll see you for the next one.